I'm your host, and this is Conversations That Connect, a discussion series where we bring together the folks who are moving our industry forward. Joining me today is Michael Anderson, Industry Advisory Lead at Guidewire Software. Thank you for joining me today, Michael.
Good morning, Stephanie, and thank you for having me.
I know that when you and I chat, I've said it to people before, I feel like we cover like 15 topics in 15 minutes. We won't do that today, but there's just so many things that you are an expert in. I thought today we would kind of focus on you've got this amazing, 30 plus year career in P&C at the intersection of claims and data analytics and ecosystem. And so I thought we would kind of start there. And I would love to hear from you if you're noticing any major shifts on how carriers are thinking about technology adoption. And then specifically, because it's top of mind for everyone, AI, automation, and data-driven decisions.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and it's amazing that 30 years have gone by in the industry, and it's gone by so fast. But yeah, I think one of the biggest shifts that I see today is that technology, I think, is no longer viewed simply as an operational tool. It's increasingly seen as and becoming a strategic enabler for the business. And insurers are investing more aggressively in AI, of course, just like most other industries. Automation and data-driven decisioning, but the conversation has also evolved. It's less about experimenting with new technology and more about how these capabilities will serve to reshape their operating models, improve decision quality, and create better customer experiences. So at the same time, there's also, I think, a growing recognition that insurers can't do this alone. When I started in the industry, we tried to do the vast amount of all of our development and execution of the strategy. We tried doing it as much internally as possible. I think that fundamentally has changed. Success, I think, is largely increasingly being dependent on building the right ecosystem of partners to complement your core system technology that ultimately is clearly aligned with your strategic imperatives, and also working with your partners to innovate rapidly.
It's funny, I think about the evolution of the ecosystem over time. And, I've been in the industry for over 38 years, and it feels like there's a shift there as well, right? So not just the adoption of the technology is changing, but how folks view the ecosystem. But you work with so many carriers. I'd love to hear your view on kind of where and how we're evolving.
Yeah, I think, we're very fortunate within our industry that the ecosystem has almost become, the catalyst for innovation. And I think it's forcing the industry to be better. Yeah, it wasn't long ago, or it didn't feel like it was long ago, that when I looked at my business partners when I was on the insurance side, we really had integrations only to maybe two or three key partners when I started. And that, of course, grew, but those integrations, they took a long time. They were reserved only for your most strategic business partners. They were expensive. And what I would say they were largely what I always refer to as task centric. So they only served a single purpose, and that could be an integration with a service partner for rental cars. And that integration was designed with the adjuster in mind, passing information back to that adjuster, and the estimating software integrations that was um, tasked to just bring in the estimating information so he or she can move it to the next phase along the claims process. And I think what I've really seen, particularly over the last few years with the driver of greater claims innovation, is a move towards a more orchestrated ecosystem, where partners are contributing capabilities across the entire process or life cycle of the claim rather than just those individual tasks. Partners are also contributing data that can be leveraged beyond just that single transaction. So how do you partner with an entity who has arguably a vast amount of data that they can bring into the insurance company's ecosystem and not just look at it for that task for which you originally developed that integration for, but is there other data that they may have that can help better serve an adjacent transaction, and create this ebb and flow of data throughout the claims process? versus what I call a adjuster-based integration. It's a fundamentally different approach of working with your partners, putting them all in a room and say, look, this is what I want to do. Our customers want claims automation. They want straight through processing. They want manual processing. They want everywhere in between. And to achieve that, we all need to work together for the best interests of our mutual customers. So how do we do that? What data can you contribute? And how do we deliver value across the entire claims journey? And I see more and more organizations taking that approach, particularly those that have successfully achieved higher degrees of automation or straight through processing.
Yeah, there were so many good nuggets in there. I feel like when I first came into an IT role in the industry, I remember saying that every integration into my core system at that time was five to $800,000. It was going to be somewhere between 6 and 9 months, possibly even a year. And there was just really, it felt like there was never the time or the money to do sort of the deep integrations that we wanted to do. And I feel like that is changing. It's getting better, certainly, but I feel like it has to change, right? Because we just couldn't move at speed there. When I think about automation, the data that drives the next best action or the data that drives the actual status of the claim, I think is sometimes hidden in that partner data that you're talking about, right? So this event just happened. What's the next thing that's going to the policyholder or the claimant is going to have to do? Is sometimes hidden in that data. And I feel as an industry, we can do better. Today, a lot of times, if you have a portal and your customer portal people go in to see what their claim status is, it will say things like, reported or investigating, if you're, in process, right? And those statuses are so high level. I'm not sure that they ever deterred a phone call or put off a phone call. But I feel like within the ecosystem, working together, we probably all have enough of the story that we can serve that information up better than we do today.
And I think the evolution brings about new challenges as well. As processes become more automated, and there's greater, to your point, digital engagement with the customers, there is increased pressure around data governance, accuracy, timeliness to ensure the ecosystem functions effectively. Right? Go back to the traditional days of an adjuster where he or she is vetting out whether a particular data element on a report or data feed that's coming in may or may not be accurate, and they may choose to ignore it or take a different action. When you lose that human in the loop in some of the automated transactions, you are now becoming highly dependent on your business partners to serve that data up when it needs to be consumed and it needs to be more accurate. So the whole notion of governance around your ecosystem, I think, becomes elevated the more you begin to automate your processes.
Yeah, I think it also there's this additional complexity when, like, I think about my last Guidewire deployment before I came to this side of the house. There were 100 integrations between my core system, and some of those were internal as well, but external entities and internal, and that was just a claims, a claims deployment. And so that complexity, I feel like, is also changing maybe where some of these decisions lie. Like, I don't know if you've experienced it lately, but particularly when we talk about AI, I'm hearing from CEOs and CIOs and business leaders that it's starting to get a little bit fuzzy where the authority for that decision to go with a particular partner, network partner, lies today because of what you talked about, the data piece of it, right? The analytics piece, the data accuracy piece, the security pieces, and then of course, just by nature of being relatively new, AI has some inherent risk with it, right? And it feels like those decision points are shifting. I don't know if you've experienced anything like that.
Yeah, I think, as you look at the landscape, I think one of the challenges, to your point, you've got so many integrations. How do you effectively create a governance strategy that can accommodate all of your partners? Because ultimately, the decisions that AI make or the adjuster make is still ultimately the accountability. The insurance company's responsible, right? So I think organizations that I've worked with are revamping their data governance plans. They're reassessing the risk profile of each AI model that is built and deployed. By and large, many are, I have found, at least over the last couple of years, have taken what I would say a very conservative approach, deploying many of the operational advanced AI models, what I would say more in the back office, to make sure that some of the risks don't get exposed to the customer. Particularly even those that do get exposed to the customer, if they're of significant risk, those are being validated by a human prior, things like coverage declinations and the like. We're now seeing more and more organizations becoming much more comfortable in pushing some of the customer-facing models. We see, first notice of loss, um, more straight-through processing, particularly with agentic AI, tying together and bringing forth much better capabilities, faster to market, conjoining, separate data sources in a much easier and straightforward way. So I think we're getting there as an industry. It's still going to take some time.
Yeah, yep. So recently in a thought leadership piece, you talked about AI generated fraud and operational complexity. So what emerging challenges do you think do you see on the horizon, and how can partners help with that?
Yeah, I can speak to claims. Regardless of the market, we're seeing a proliferation of AI fraud, whether it be image fraud. You go back maybe a year or two ago, I think images that were augmented were pretty straightforward. You could clearly identify them. That's not really the case anymore. It's gotten so good, it's become really difficult in some cases, in many cases, for individuals to determine what's real, what's not real. And when you think about us as an industry, that we have relied on visual evidence as validation of damage. What do we do when we could no longer trust what adjusters are looking at to be authentic? So I think you will see in the next, and same thing holds true for documents, videos, any artifact that's coming into the claims organization. I believe in the next couple of years is or will be required to be audited to ensure that there's no AI fraud. And I think that holds true for just about any document. So I think you'll see a greater proliferation of enterprise-wide AI fraud strategies and tools that are deployed. I think so that's one. But I also think too that sometimes we think we as an industry are the only ones using advanced AI, but that's not true either. You see it in litigation where the plaintiff's bar is heavily invested in advanced analytics to target cases to go and bring forth suits against insurance companies. So, folks on the other side of the fence are equally investing very heavily to go after insurance companies. And it's just the tip of the iceberg there. So I think claim organizations need to be cognizant, of course, not only of their own internal strategy, but they also need to be well aware of what the external, I don't want to use the word adversaries, but folks on the other side are developing that could be counterproductive to their objectives.
Yes, it's a to me, it's so amazing to think of how far we've come in sort of the fraud diagnostics and prevention. When I entered the industry in underwriting, so long ago, our big fraud detection was stand in front of the object with today's newspaper, like so we could know that you took the photo today, right? And it's so sophisticated now, and there's so many different ways to combat it. And I think partner is going to play a key role in that because, again, it's another place I think, Mike, where our data together is better than any one carrier's data isolated on its own. And I
Right. And I
think the
think
power of that ecosystem comes together there.
particularly in the case of fraud, I think you need a mosaic of different partners, with the niche use cases that are emerging, to get really the best in class for each use case. It may require two, three, four different partners versus a single partner.
And that's a completely different way of thinking about it. I think you're right. It's necessary and it's a completely different way of thinking about it. I also think that as an industry, I wonder if some of our procurement processes need to be sharpened up and expedited, right? I mean, again, the days of looking for a partner, let's say, to solve a problem, if you're now looking for two or three partners to work together, it probably can't take you a year or two to make a decision on that partner, right? And it certainly, again, can't take you 6 to 9 months to integrate that partner. And there can't be these walls between partners where they're not sharing data or not sharing information, right? And again, you mentioned earlier orchestration. To get to that full orchestration, I really feel like we have to change the way that we do things and even the way that we approach problems. Um, for carriers and vendors looking to invest in innovation, but maybe they're constrained by, legacy technology or legacy resourcing, what practical strategies or partnership models have you seen succeed that drive tangible business outcomes?
I think, again, that's a great question. I think regardless of insurer or partner, the market is placing pressure to modernize your core systems and change your method of engagement with your business partners. And if you're still dealing with some form of legacy constraints or resources, I think the key is being more pragmatic. The organizations I see succeeding focus largely on specific business problems that they need to solve, rather than trying to transform everything at once. They start with targeted use cases where automation, data, or AI can deliver better outcomes, and then maybe expanding from there. I think right behind that, the other factor is partnership. The most successful initiatives happen when insurers and technology partners work closely together to solve those business problems, not just implement their software or implement their capabilities. And when that collaboration, I think, is strong, innovation tends to be much faster. And that's evolved over time as well.
Yep, yep. So, given some of the things that we've talked about today, what do you think is like a practical step that the folks listening to this could implement, starting tomorrow to really move forward?
But I think that depends on who you are as an organization, right? You talk about AI. We see some organizations that, their entire strategy is we are going to become an AI enterprise claims organization, and they set that very high strategic bar. And then you've got other organizations that are going to take, kind of that stepping stone approach, and what's right, what's wrong. I think largely depends on your organization, your strategy, your business, and your ability to execute. But I think for the masses, one practical step that people can take today or tomorrow is start by identifying, what are those business problems that can best be solved for automation, AI, or better use of the data, for which could have a significant impact on outcomes. And if you start with the customer first, and you address how you can improve your net promoter score, how you can better retain your profitable customers, that's never going to be a losing strategy. And from there, bring together the right mix of business and technology stakeholders to look at that problem through both lenses, right? Operationally and from the customer. As if you can hammer out and solve not just improving your customer service, but you could also do that in the context of driving down your loss adjustment expense. And if you could do those two things while also better managing your indemnity, it kind of hits all three legs of the stool effectively. And that's the perfect scenario when you're able to do all three of those. But some of the most successful initiatives start when the business drives the outcome that they want. I've seen transformations that are driven by both business and IT. One of the questions I often get is which works better? Again, it gets to how does your organization operate and what are your organizational strengths in your transformation. But generally, I would say I lean more towards those that are driven by the business and in strong partnership with technology. When they both are aligned on the outcomes and incentivized towards the same outcome, is when I see some of those transformation strategies work the best, regardless of whether it's business or IT leading the charge.
I appreciate that insight. I feel like when the business shares what they're trying to achieve with IT, and so the folks who are working on the product and who are doing the engineering or even doing the integration, when they understand the business problem that's being solved and being addressed, I think we get the best outcomes as an industry. So I love that. I also love the call out to start with the customer. I mean, one of the things that I think I found is that if there's a pinch point in the process or a pain point in the process for the customer, there's actually likely a pain point for the adjuster or the employee on the other side of that too, regardless of where it is in the organization. But you rarely have a communication failure or a pain point for just one persona, right? And so I think you're absolutely right. If you start with the policyholder experience and you work back, you're going to find that you're solving a number of problems in that journey. So I love that insight. Um, One of the
And
things I ask, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, when I talk to customers too, I see varying transformation strategies, and there's some strategies that would be, and they're almost two extremes where, one, we're going to start with a white piece of paper. We're going to reinvent claims as if we don't have the operational debt or technology debt, or we're just going to take a white piece of paper and completely reinvent the claims experience. And that works in certain cases. But I think the vast majority, and maybe the better approach for most organizations, not all, is what are your strategic constants and anchor your strategy in those strategic constants. What are those 4 or 5 things, and maybe more, that will not change in the next 5 years, 10 years, right? Those things that if you were to set your strategy around, you know that customers will still want a fast, seamless, easy first notice of loss experience. That's never going to change. They're still going to want accurate and prompt payment. That will never change. They will still want to engage with a representative of the insurance company when they want to. That won't change, or when they need to. That won't change. So, how do you enable those strategic constants that we all work on and deliver and execute on today? But how do you do that in new and meaningful ways, leveraging new technologies and capabilities that can better deliver those strategic constants?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are some things that have never changed and are not going to change, right? And I love the idea of creating a strategy that supports those. Because you can't really go wrong, right? That's to your point. Wanting an easy, quick FNOL that gets you to next steps is never going to change.
Right.
Wonderful. So one of the things I ask every guest is if you could bring about any change in our industry, this is sort of our moonshot, right? Like if you could bring about any change in the industry, what would that be?
I think for what I see across my engagements, I am hopeful that the industry can come together and be more open with data that is needed in the age of automation, because you've got to think about what it requires to automate claims in whole or in part. It requires data. All those thought processes that an adjuster makes today that need to be automated predicated on data. And I think there's organizations that are conservative with their data, and I understand their business reasons why. Uh, but at the end of the day, to do what's right for the customers and what they're asking for in the new way of doing business, it's going to require, I think, a different approach to data sharing. And how do you do that effectively while still maintaining, your IP, and your trade secrets and everything else that comes along with the data? I think that's an area where the industry needs to navigate.
Yeah, really interesting. And navigating that with, to your point, what differentiates you, right? And I think it may be similar to what you just mentioned about um, really diving in and understanding what are the constants that aren't changed. So is your differentiator something that is very specific to an element of your data, or is it more process? Is it more services that you provide? So it's sort of an interesting exercise, I think, for a carrier to walk through and see what that special sauce is that we all believe, right? As carriers, we all believe what we have.
Right.
Um,
Right.
awesome. So thank you so much for taking the time today, Mike, and spending time with me. This was great, and I know our audience appreciates it.
You're welcome, Stephanie. Always able to help, and always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.